show that takes you along with host and age explorer Rod on his continuing journey of discovery into life's challenges, opportunities, options, and all the latest and greatest things that come with getting older. The Rad Life is brought to you this week by Your Home for a Lifetime, a company dedicated to empowering you to stay safely, independently, and comfortably in your own home. And now here is your host, Rad Gantos.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Raad Life. Thanks again for being with us for the last 6 years. Hopefully, we have provided you with content that has been useful, introduced you to some people that are movers and shakers in Orange County in their own areas of expertise. And as always, Wednesdays, 12 to 1, we are always here. So please plan on joining us, put it on your calendar, subscribe to the channel on OC Talk Radio's YouTube channel. A lot of other content, a lot of other interesting shows that are happening over there. And today is no different. I have the pleasure as my guest today, the incoming mayor of Costa Mesa, California. I wish I had a bunch of cheerleaders, John, behind me.
Yeah, I know. That would be nice.
Can we have an applause reel, maybe, Paul, next time?
Right, I'll work on that.
We need to work on that. Right. So Mayor John Stevens is with us today, and I really am excited to talk to you because you've got a couple of interesting things going on. I mean, I think I got some news that maybe we'll be hearing today from about less than 24 hours ago on a couple of things. Okay, so I know you also are professionally, like you're mayor, but your plate is full. So why don't you tell people that don't know a lot about you, and there shouldn't be a lot of them out there, but a little background on yourself, how long you've been on city council, and we had former Mayor Katrina Foley on a couple of times during COVID, and how's it like? I know you guys work closely together.
Yeah, so I'm a trial attorney by trade. I've got 4 kids. I've lived in Costa Mesa for 32 years. Practiced law in Costa Mesa or in Orange County for 32 years. And in about 2011, my friend Katrina Foley said, do you want to get involved in Costa Mesa politics? So I ran in 2012. I lost that election. Ran in 2016. I won. And then I served from 2016 to 2020 on the city council. And then I ran for my district election for re-election and lost. But then Katrina, who is my good friend, then she ran for the Board of Supervisors. She won that election, and that vacated the seat of mayor of the city of Costa Mesa.
Right.
So on St. Patrick's Day, in the wee hours of the morning on St. Patrick's Day, the city council appointed me as the mayor to fill Katrina Foley's seat. And so I was sworn in at the end of March, and last night was my second meeting presiding over the Costa Mesa City Council.
So how does it feel to be in that role at such an instrumental city in Orange County as we are coming out of this sort of pandemic? I mean, I know that you guys as a community under Katrina's leadership too, you guys were very hands-on during this period, and it shows. I mean, you guys took initiatives, did things that other cities maybe kind of shied away from doing, and it shows. Like your retail, the support for the businesses, so forth. So here we are, John. Like year 2, beginning of sort of midway through year 2. What are you seeing? Are we still sort of in it? Are we coming out of it? What are you seeing from your perspective?
Well, I think that we've made a lot of progress, and we've made a lot of good decisions over this period of time. I mean, we were one of the first cities to have a mask mandate.
Yep.
And I think we're the second city after Irvine. It's interesting. Irvine's actually been very progressive on these issues as well.
It's true. Yeah, very interesting.
We were the first city to have an eviction moratorium, and really one of the only cities, I think, to have a commercial eviction moratorium. And I think that commercial eviction moratorium, the purpose of that was to give businesses an opportunity to stay alive during the pandemic, because we're here in April. Well, last April, That's when we were going through the PPP loans, and
Right.
businesses were very worried about making their rent and whether they were going to be able to stay in their premises. And so we kind of dug in and said, what can we do for those businesses? So the first thing we did was this eviction moratorium, and it's kind of a bellwether because at our last meeting, our first meeting in April, we repealed the commercial eviction moratorium with the theory that now we're in the orange tier, we're going into the yellow tier, hopefully in the next few weeks, and most businesses have had an opportunity to stay alive, and now it's time, because they're getting revenue, and to kind of
Right.
stand on their own 2 feet, and starting May 1st start to pay their going forward rent. So I think that is kind of a, an endorsement of the work that we've done. I mean, I'm sure businesses have certainly struggled. There's no question about that, but we've been able to keep a lot of them alive in Costa Mesa. In addition, we gave out with the funding from the federal government, and also with $2 million of our general fund, we gave out $4.7 million in small business grants to Costa Mesa businesses. And the theory of the council throughout the whole time was just, let's just give our businesses a fighting chance. And I think it's been successful. We've got some good feedback on those efforts.
Yeah, you guys definitely stepped up that way, and it was what's the word I'm looking for? Like proactive.
Yes.
That you guys basically took a very proactive role in this, and it was early on. And some of the decisions, like the mask mandate, was sort of a controversial one, but you guys stood by your guns on that one, and I think it showed. And I think businesses very much probably appreciated that. And as you said, it was super hard for all businesses out there, to be honest. I mean, let alone the pivoting, let alone whatever you needed to do. But then, for some of the businesses that were really dependent on foot traffic, it was you were facing things that you never thought you would face. And not only did you need to change your business model, but your environment, how people basically, you didn't have the ability to have people come in. So some people, had a sort of a growth mindset to it. Some people took a bunker mentality to it. And, but for you guys, for your responsibility to the community, I think absolutely. I think you guys were very proactive in doing that. And it makes sense that now you're looking at a removal of a moratorium as businesses are more open and they've already survived to this point. So you figure, they have the means to basically stand on their own 2 feet eventually.
Well, the other thing too is one thing we saw is how resilient our business owners are. So there are a lot of businesses that were able to develop kind of new infrastructures and revenue streams.
Oh yeah.
Because of the pandemic, and that's of course all they had at the time. But now their kind of traditional business has come back, but they still have that that to-go capability, or
right.
coming in directly to the consumers. And then the other thing, of course, that's happened in a lot of cities, including Costa Mesa, is businesses moving outside and using open spaces and doing creative things like that.
But so let's talk about that, because that has, and I think it's unavoidable. I mean, commercial real estate, I think Costa Mesa is a little bit of a unique situation because you guys have a really very strong economic engine when it comes to stuff like that. But it was not unheard of to hear somebody talk about, commercial real estate sitting vacant, or large big box basically, feeling the impact of online commerce that was increasing. So here we are now looking at situations where, whether it's because of remote working or what have you, that commercial real estate itself as a unit has to reinvent itself, has to basically consider, okay, an office that would require 3,000 square feet now can operate with 1,500. So what happens to the half of the square footage now? And I'm just using that as a simple number because you can easily see how where larger numbers is the same thing. So I think that's also something that we are not necessarily, I mean, you could look at it as a challenge, or you could look at it as an opportunity, as always, right? So we could look at that real estate scenario and say, COVID didn't necessarily cause it, it accelerated what was already happening. So what are you guys like even looking at stuff like that? I know you guys had a couple of ordinances. I think maybe one of them that was even on the council docket yesterday that has to do with commercial retail.
Well, right. I mean, that's a good one. And we buried the lead. We need to start talking about that. But getting to like commercial office, that's something that we really as a city haven't gotten into that much. But I work at a commercial office complex, the Met in Costa Mesa, and I could tell you, Rod, that we're here in the office, we're social distancing, we wear our masks when we leave our office, and there's plexiglass all around our office and things like that. But
Right.
the actual people that are in and occupying space in our buildings, it seems like it's about 20 or 30%.
That's a huge hit. That's a
I don't
huge
know.
hit.
I don't know how office landlords are handling that, but I mean, I just know what I observe. But
Well,
yeah,
right. I mean, and my professional side is I'm a commercial real estate commercial designer. So we do hospitality, retail, restaurants, spas, wellness centers, etc., offices. And I got to tell you, I mean, that if you're a property owner who has commercial real estate right now, not only do you have the potential impact from remote work and companies rightfully saying, look, overhead wise, I can cut down my overhead by basically having a smaller space. I've learned from a year of efficient operations that I don't necessarily need to have everybody under the same roof all the time. So if I'm a commercial property owner, I'm looking at that going, that's an issue. How do I make my property continue to be appealing for
right.
stuff? And I referred to an example of a TGI Fridays that was in San Juan Capistrano off Greenfield that sat vacant for a better part of 3 years and had nothing to do with COVID.
Right.
And I told that real estate broker at one point, hey, why don't you turn it into a small little like food court, like a small Anaheim packing house idea down there, right?
Yes.
And guess what's happening? There's 3 restaurants going into that same space that used to be TGI Fridays. Like there's a reinvention of the wheel that needs to happen. I don't know who leads the charge on that. I mean, usually it's private industry, but
right. Well, private industry needs to lead the charge, but the city has to work with the private industry in creative ways. I'll give you one example that kind of reminds me of that. If you're familiar with Costa Mesa, there's a kind of an iconic property, the Grants for Guns property, which is on Newport Boulevard, just south of the Triangle.
Yes.
And that's been sitting vacant for a long time. And so they're moving forward now. I believe it's finalized, at least with the city, it's finalized. It's going to be a large commissary kitchen, and there's going to be 29 different spaces for chefs to come in and do, cooking for catering and for takeout and things like that. And that is a really creative use, kind of similar to what you proposed for that. And the city staff had to work very creatively on that to work out the details and the requirements to avoid traffic issues and parking problems and things like that. But you really have to think as a city, think outside the box and be responsive to your business community as they make these transitions.
Well, it's almost like acting, stepping away from sort of the traditional role of cities and becoming more of we've always had economic development in cities, but this is almost like more entrepreneurship incubation almost, right? It's one step further. I mean, Long Beach does a good job at that with Mayor Garcia there and their economic development people, and they're very much reaping the rewards of a lot of that sort of out of the box thinking that they've been doing. But I think it's an interesting opportunity, and I really believe it's more an opportunity than a challenge out there if we can actually just get creative about how we reinvent. I keep telling people, John, it's not the new normal, it's the next normal. It's an evolutionary thing, not just another, next thing or new thing. So with that being said, like you said, we've kind of buried the lead a little bit, and I want to get to it in a minute. And people are going, "What is the lead? What's the lead?
What is the lead?
What is the lead?"
We're teasing.
We're teasing, right? But it's okay. I promise it'll be worthwhile. I don't know what the result was, but John will tell us.
Yeah.
So the other thing I want to just mention relevant to this before we step away from sort of the food, beverage, restaurant kind of component. 2 questions. Do you think we're ever putting the genie back in the bottle on alcohol with delivery and orders to go?
Yeah, what a great question. I just got to tell you a really quick story about that. So right in that same area as Grants for Guns is El Matador. Great.
Yeah, it's a good Mexican restaurant. I love that place.
Great Mexican restaurant in Costa
Yep.
Mesa. So right when, it must have been 2 days after the pandemic, it was on a Wednesday, I remember, and I went in and I got some takeout there, and I know the owner, Greg, and he says, and it was dead. And he said, John, if we could only sell takeout margaritas, that would really help. And I'm like, well, what can I do about it? Well, 2 days later, we get the announcement from Governor Newsom that they're allowing takeout cocktails. So right. I texted him right away. It was just like an answered prayer for El Matador and all these businesses.
Yeah, well, the margins of alcohol. I mean, it's where businesses make their money. And now these are businesses that are basically have an ABC license, and they're not limited to just their covers of their tables. So what do you think? I mean, do we have any indication? Is that genie ever going back into the bottle, or is it just it's been out too long that it's never going to happen?
Well, I think what's going to happen really is when the state, whether it's the governor or the legislature, looks at this, there's now have been built up enough data, right, to say, did this exception, if you will, did it create a safety issue? Because really that just comes down to safety.
Right, exactly.
So why do we not allow, take out cocktails? Well, the theory always was that is kind of a gateway to driving under the influence. So we
open container and all that
yeah.
stuff. Right.
So we're developing, I think, enough data, and obviously anybody would agree that it's not worth the safety risk if there is a safety risk.
Of course, yeah.
But that's not, that's something that can be studied and analyzed by people,
now you've got a year worth
that are smarter than me.
Yeah, you got a year worth of data. Like it's not an emotional decision. Now it's like, well, let's look at the facts. Here's what was actually the case. The other question I want to ask you is, again, with the restaurants, but it's relevant to the outside seating and those sort of temporary patios, right? Now, you know, and I know that, it is notorious when somebody shows up to the city council or planning commission and basically says, look, I want additional seats on my curb, and every excuse on the planet, like, no, the parking, and no, you need to make sure that the handicap accessibility path of egress is there, and no, you can't put this, and it's like, they walk out, oh my God, I got 2 chairs. Yeah. Two extra chairs on a table. Way to go. We're good. We're good for all that effort of about 6 months to get it all dialed in. So now all of a sudden there's all these like no problem. I refer back to San Clemente downtown area, Del Mar. Oh my God. If you mentioned anything about outside patios, let alone in the front of the restaurants, it was always, it's going to impact the available parking. Well, for the better part of the year, every one of these things have had an outside patio that actually took up a little bit of parking. So my question to you is this going to make us reevaluate sort of especially in like a mixed use area, right? Or in a development zone, is it going to make us reevaluate our parking programs, our potential patio seating areas, because that again has been a lifeblood for restaurants in the course of this pandemic.
Yeah, no, I think we will. And we've got a great council member in Costa Mesa, Arlis Reynolds. I don't know if you know Arlis. She'd be a wonderful guest, because this is kind of her area of expertise. She's actually gotten a grant to be on have further kind of educational study on the issue of mobility, biking, safety, driver safety, things like that. And so what she would say if she were here, as I've been learning about this from her, is we need to think of creative ways to have alternatives to driving, and not make everything about don't make every decision a car-centric decision.
California car culture needs a evolution. Basically.
Right. Break kind of the orthodoxy of we need to focus on parking and more lanes on the freeway and wider lane. Sorry, on the roads, wider lanes on the roads, and kind of encourage people to walk and bike. And I think having that outdoor use is part of that, because people see people outside and then they want to walk there, they want to bike there, they want to be part of it, and it's visible. It's not just about driving your car up and then going into a building.
Right. Well, I think again, it depends how you look at it. I mean, you could always look at something very gloomy and a glass half empty, but I think if you choose to, at this point, especially now that the sort of the medical seriousness, which absolutely was real, is sort of a little subsided. I think we could look at COVID as maybe have been a catalyst for a whole bunch of stuff that could be positive and push us forward. Like, I mean, like I said, we would have a conversation about somebody wanting like two extra chairs or a table or something outside the restaurant. And people would show up in groves at the city council meeting and basically, poo-poo, no, parking, whatever. Over the course of the last year, with all that stuff basically going on, I haven't heard one person complain, because also now there's a visual reference of what that looks like, how it functions, how it could be basically dovetailed into a hybrid model. So I'm kind of excited, actually, to be honest with you. Like, coming out of this, I think there's a lot of innovative things that we could do as a community, we could do as cities, individuals, designers, whatever, to further quality of life, I think, in our communities.
Well, and why not? I mean, what's our stock in trade here in Orange County? I mean, Costa Mesa has one of the most temperate, beautiful climates in the entire world.
Right.
And to bring people outside is to really take advantage of one of our greatest natural resources.
Right.
And
so
which is perfect, because tomorrow, by the way, is Earth Day.
Earth Day tomorrow. Yeah.
Earth Day.
Yeah.
Happy
Earth Day
yesterday. You know what yesterday was?
What was yesterday?
420.
420.
It's a holiday in itself.
Okay, so I'm by the way, before we get off the COVID thing, I just want to share something, because I came across it yesterday and I thought, how ironic, right? There's a show on I think it's Hulu, that's something like America's Secrets or something like that, right? And it's basically a documentary, and it's got, the first episode's like the Salem witch hunts and whatever, but like three down, because I couldn't watch the first one. It's like, okay, I'm done with this. Went to the third one, and it was about the 1918 pandemic. Okay, I'm not going to tell anybody. I mean, I'll post it on when I post this. I'll post the link to this thing, or whatever the title is. Go watch this show. It's about the 1918 pandemic, and I'm watching it and I'm listening to it, and I'm watching all the stuff that happened and how people reacted to it and the impacts and all this stuff, right? And I'm going, wow. So it made me think, like, when was this put together? Like, when did this air?
Right.
Okay. When do you think this show on the 1918 pandemic aired, John?
Wait, is it a recent show, or is it an old show?
It's this particular episode aired at a certain point that I found extremely ironic. Now, I'm watching it yesterday, okay?
Yeah.
It's about the 1918 pandemic, and it has so many parallels to what happened with the COVID thing, right? Like, I mean, we refer to it loosely. That episode aired in March of 2019.
I was
March
going to say
of 2019, to a year almost to when we got hit with the COVID pandemic. So there was no COVID pandemic on the radar, but that show about the 1918 pandemic aired literally a year prior to where it became a catastrophe for us to deal with.
Yeah. Well, and you know that we were, you talk about being on the kind of the tip of the spear with the COVID. We were told in February that there were 70 people that were infected that were going to go into Fairview Developmental Center.
Right.
And we ended up filing the lawsuit and getting an injunction on that. And that was where and the one kind of thing that I'll never forget is we go before Judge Staten, the federal court judge.
Yeah.
He comes out at the bench. This is like February 22nd of 2020. And, she's a federal court judge. She's very knowledgeable, very, very educated. And she says, okay, this is about, I'm not sure if I should call it the coronavirus or COVID-19. I mean, that's how just a month before the shutdown, even judges didn't even understand what was going on. Judge Carter, who's a great guy, I showed him, I met with him the other day at our homeless shelter. I showed him the last selfie that I took before the shutdown was with him. And it was on March 9th. And we were taking a selfie. We were at a prayer breakfast together.
Yeah.
Nobody knew it. 10 days later, we were shut down.
Yeah, John, literally, this thing, anybody who had seen it when it first aired would have a roadmap to understand what we just went through. And I found it extremely ironic that it was literally put out a year prior that we all faced this. Speaking of Fairview, by the way, lucky you still have that facility, right? I mean, like, talk about, you know, a piece of property that was being regarded as, you know, the last large remaining, you know, potential for redevelopment or whatever. And then here it comes and be put into use right in the middle of the pandemic.
Well, it did work out. It ended up being an alternative care site for kind of elderly folks and
Alzheimer's OC,
yeah,
you know,
that were recuperating, and it worked out perfectly. And once that got put in place, it was complete kind of collaboration between the county and the state and the and to use that. The problem in February that prompted the lawsuit is there wasn't that collaboration, and also there was a ton of unknowns. We didn't know what was happening.
Well, I last year, and Paul will tell you this, whenever somebody would tell me something and, you know, goes down this path, whatever, I mean, I will admit, when it first happened, I'm like, we'll be over this in 2 weeks.
Right.
This will pass in 2 weeks, right? And then very quickly I realized it wasn't going to be the case. But people would go about things and so forth. And I'd say, you know what? It's my first pandemic. How about you?
Yeah.
Like, we don't really know. And so I even a couple of episodes back, I said, you know, like, it's very easy Monday morning quarterbacking, especially with people that are in elected positions, for the community to basically come out and say, well, you should have done this, you should have done this. We didn't really have a playbook. We didn't know what to do. And we kind of had to learn. Some people learned quicker than others. Case in point, you guys in Costa Mesa. So now that we have basically teased the heck out of people for so long, right? Why don't we talk about this one of the things that happened at City Council yesterday that also has an impact sort of on retail, and it's a new thing for Costa Mesa.
Right. Well, this, you know, so what we passed in our first reading of our ordinance allowing retail cannabis and home delivery in the commercial zones of our city, and that goes back to a Measure M that was put on the ballot by the city. Sorry, Measure Q. I misspoke. Measure Q that was put on the ballot by the city council and voted on by the voters. And so retail, storefront, and home delivery was overwhelmingly approved by the voters in 2020 in the last election. And so then our task was, it was a non-codified measure, meaning that we then had to take that measure and create the codes to implement the program. And that's what we did yesterday. So we had our first reading, and so we had to do things like define, like, what is a youth center, and how do you measure the distance between sensitive uses and the cannabis premises, and we directed staff to develop a very robust social equity program.
Perfect.
Because as you probably know, you know, marijuana laws have been enforced disproportionately against people of color, and so what we're trying to do is, and then unfortunately, then the folks, the demographics that have been victimized by the enforcement of these laws have not, since Proposition 64, been the ones that are benefiting from the legalization. So we're trying to kind of address that in our social equity program and create a little bit of more of equity or equality.
Well, in the industry itself, John, I mean, I had the pleasure of actually designing a concept for a dispensary in Santa Ana a couple of years ago. And I'll tell you, from my perspective, and just, you know, prior to interior design, I have a business background. So my brain tends to do left and right brain at the same time. The industry has multi-layers. I mean, every business in that industry, or every you know, major player in that industry, is looking at differentiation, looking at, sort of is it a hospitality-like environment that their setup is set up in? Is it more of a clinical kind of environment? So again, it's not a one-size-fits-all. And I think, a robust program that basically from a city like you guys that are innovative and has multi-layers of different retail, I think is the smart play, because you're going to have, I remind people that, there was a place at the top of, I think it was the Bloomingdale's in Beverly Hills or something like that, that was like, it was they didn't sell product, but they sold paraphernalia. And it was, then they started selling product, and it was like white glove service. So there's multi-layers to this thing, and all basically has obviously a very positive potential tax-based component to it, which is why a lot of places are looking at it seriously. I think, are you guys like the number 2 or number 3 now? If you guys approve this thing in Orange County, there's not a lot of cities that actually allow it, right?
So Santa Ana in 2017 allowed retail cannabis in industrial zones.
Sure. Yeah.
Our measure, and now our ordinance, allows storefronts in commercial zones. So the difference is, in Costa Mesa, the dispensaries are going to be like in a shopping center.
That's huge.
And so, and I do believe, and listen, this was voted on by the peoples, and we're going to move it forward and make it successful. But I think we're going to have some very well capitalized businesses that are going to go into struggling shopping centers and substantially upgrade those centers in terms of the amount of consumers that are going to visit those centers, the infrastructure of those centers. I mean, with the type of investment that some of these businesses are going to put into these real estate, they're going to slurry the parking lot, and everything's going to be well painted, and I think it's going to really upgrade the city's commercial corridors, and the commercial corridors, not just in Costa Mesa but all over, because of online shopping, have suffered, and we have to start thinking creatively about ways to compensate for that.
The old adage that says, success has many fathers and failure is an orphan. So when you have a model that works, and especially, for people who don't realize just how huge it is, that what you just said, that it's not an industrial zone, but a commercial zone, that is a game changer as far as how this industry is now going to be representative and interacted with, and what the potentials of being able to reach out to people, how it's housed, how it's integrated with other stuff. There's complexities and challenges that are going to come in terms of enforcement and policy, but it's a game changer.
Yes.
And so just to be clear for the people that are listening, Santa Ana and you, is that the only two people? Two cities?
And I was told last night that Stanton is close to.
That fascinates me. Like out of all possible ones, that if I threw a dart at the wall, that I would think that would be the next one, I would not have picked Stanton, but that's good for them. That's pretty progressive too.
Well, and so we talked about what it's going to do, and of course it's a 7% tax, and we allocated half a percent, Rod, to public art, and 0.5% to a local first-time home buyers program.
Smart.
So with the issues of affordable housing, which is a whole nother discussion. But one of the things we have in Costa Mesa that I've always wanted to do something about, and this is a great vehicle to do it, is we have so many people that graduate from our schools, graduate from our high schools, have their parents who live here, but they can't afford to live here themselves. And so they go to other communities, and then the parents, who are kind of legacy residents here, don't have the benefit of their children and their grandchildren being
as
around.
They get older.
And so I know you're concerned about that, and you don't have kind of the cross-generational support because
that's a big one for me,
housing
John. That's a big one for me. When we started, I think I mentioned this to you when we were talking to prepare for the show. When we started the Raad Life focus was elderly. It was sort of a baby boomer generation coming out. It was 6 years ago. People were starting to talk about stuff like that. I remember having Steve Moyer on, who's the head of AgeWell, who basically told me that in 2025 the projection is 1 in 5 people in Orange County will be 65 or older. We have an aging population.
Right.
And when we talk about affordable housing, everybody goes, no, not in my own backyard, blah, 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 whatever. But it's not tenement housing. We're talking about people that are born and raised in communities that have a vested interest. They have a DNA in that community that basically cannot afford to stay in that community, even though, like to your point, they've lived with their legacy parents in that community that bought in the 70s or what have you. They cannot live and start their careers in that community, and we lose them not only in terms of an economic base, right? Because definitely we lose that. The retired people aren't spending as much on retail. They're trying to hold on to the property taxes at the lowest possible. They're not moving out of their homes, so the property isn't necessarily turning over to a higher tax base.
Right.
We're losing them on that level. We're losing their brain power in terms of future leadership. We are basically looking at losing them in terms of leaders at city council and elected officials, because they have a bloodline connection to the community and what is the best interest of the community from their own personal experience of lived in it and being born and raised there. We're losing that. And then the ultimate is when you have a parent, like in my case, my 86-year-old dad, that is not doing well, I'll be honest with you, in the last 24 hours. I mean, he's probably on his last legs.
Oh, that's too bad.
I know you've got your mom, it's a terrible thing when you don't have that infrastructure built into the community to take care of your elderly as they get older by their own families, because they cannot afford to be within a 10-mile radius.
Right.
It's a genuine city issue, and I've been kind of preaching that for a number of years. I'm so happy that you guys are looking at that, because it's very real, very real.
Yes. And it's really a way to put the concept of affordable housing, whether you want it to be capital A, capital H, or lowercase,
right?
But to create a place that's affordable for different generations and people at different stages of their lives to live, and the different options, to really put it in terms of why should somebody who is in their house, who is comfortable, why should they care about that? And they care about it because they're taking care of their children and their grandchildren, and it benefits them. And so it creates this kind of discussion around affordable housing, which, is really collaborative, and people are of course, we're going through our housing element like every other city and trying to address our RENA numbers, and that's a big number, and it's arguably unattainable, certainly in the time frame. But at least you have more open-mindedness about creating affordable opportunities to live in our community and other
as long as we're talking about it, I think we can come up with something. I mean, the ADU situation was a good first step with the additional dwelling units, or the accessory dwelling units, to have that additional possibility to house a loved one or something on your own property. But listen, I know we've got a bunch of other stuff we want to talk about. I want to talk more about affordable housing, and especially excited to know that you guys are doing some things that are innovative. I also would like to talk about the homeless thing, but I want to have you come back on because we run out of time.
Okay.
I would love to have you come back on, please, and talk about that. You guys are very much doing stuff that needs to permeate throughout a lot of the communities in Orange County, as far as I'm concerned, and I would love to be able to highlight, John.
I appreciate it. Yeah, we've got a great city staff, a great council, and we're happy to come on this show and tell you about what we're doing in Costa Mesa. I'm very
It'll be a pleasure to have you on again. And again, thank you for taking the time. Mayor John Stevens from Costa Mesa. I appreciate it, buddy, and I really will look forward to seeing you again.
All right, thanks, Rod. It's been a pleasure.
You have been listening to the Raad Life radio show with your host and age explorer, Raad Life, brought to you on the one and only octalkradio.net. Join us again next week as we continue our journey of discovery into life's challenges, opportunities, options, and all the latest and greatest things that come with getting older.